it will be a benefit to us. Another way of saying taking a righteous risk is to have faith and to have bravery. In times of famine, you need to have faith and bravery. Just like in the ancient times, whenever they got hungry, they went hunting. It takes a lot of bravery to go out there and hunt amongst the wild beasts. And all they had was bows and arrows and swords. But they would go out there and hunt wild beasts, knowing that they could get devoured by a lion, knowing that they could get devoured by a bear or whatever was out in that wilderness and in that jungle. They still knew that they had to bring food back to the village. They had to bring meat and vegetables and fruit back to their wives and their children. They had to step out there and take that risk to go hunt and gather for the food. And in these modern times, when the enemy is attempting to use famine and lack of resources, lack of options to push people back against the wall, never lose your faith, never lose your bravery, never lose your ability to take righteous risk whenever that time comes. Many times those righteous risks that you take to better yourself, better your family, will be things that bring you a reward sooner or later. That's the first thing we can get from Father Abraham in this time when he was in a time of famine. Another thing that we can learn from him is that he listened to the promises of the Most High. The Most High told him here, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. I'll curse them that curse you. In you all families of the earth shall be blessed. We are the children of Abraham, by genealogy, by bloodline, and by faith. We are his children. So the same thing that the Most High told the Father Abraham, he's also telling to us. He's also making us those promises. He's making us those promises of Deuteronomy 28, of what he will do to bless us if we obey him and endure to the end. That's something else that you cannot forget in times of famine. Never forget the promises of the Most High. He has promised you and your people that you will be the rulers of this earth. He has promised you and your people that your enemies will come lick up the dust of your feet. He has promised you and your people that all those who refuse to serve you will be destroyed and wasted. He has promised you and your people that you shall be on top and not on bottom. You shall be the lender only and not the borrower. You shall dominate. He has made all of these promises, just like he made to Father Abraham. What got Father Abraham through his time of famine is that he never forgot the promises of the Most High. So in these times, it's important for you to always have your eyes and ears tuned in to the word of the Most High and the promises that he's made you. Understand, in many cases, that will be the only thing that you have to stand on and hold on to. Because the circumstances around you may not seem like they lining up with the promises that the Most High made you, with the prophecies that the Most High made to your household and to your people. He has called you all these great things, but there's many times where you don't see those great things happening around you and among you. That's where you gotta stand 10 toes down like Father Abraham did and hold on to all those promises that the Father has given you and that the Father has given your people. Stand 10 toes down and hold on to all the prophecies that the Most High has given you and that the Most High has given your people, because surely his word will not return to him void. That's the second jewel to get from this. Another jewel to get from this is the power of your people. What I mean by this is, whenever Father Abraham took off on his journey, he didn't do it solo. He didn't do it by himself. He had a unit with him. He had a squad with him. That's the power of the people, which means Having a powerful circle of individuals around you and among you is key and it's important. Just like the Messiah when he was on earth, the first thing that he did was recruit disciples. The first thing that he did was recruit that inner circle to be about the Father's business. He could have did it alone, but he had a team. That's the same thing with us today. In times of famine, those who have a team of brothers and sisters around them and among them are the ones who will dominate and endure through the famine. So it's very important we learn from Father Abraham about assembling a team. He had his wife and he had so many other people with him. That's something we need to remember, family. All we got is us. And let the Most High by his Spirit give you discernment on who those people need to be that's around you. I'm not saying just have folks around you just for the sake of having folks around you. But the fact remains, in these times, you have to have a team around you. I'm not saying you got to be 10,000 deep or 1,000 deep or 50 deep with people. Just a strong circle of brothers and sisters around you, a team like Father Abraham had. Because in times of famine, our people always got by having a team. Elijah had Elisha. Moses had Aaron and Joshua. The Messiah had the disciples. Gideon had his 300. David had his 30 mighty men. And the list goes on and on. Paul had Silas and Timothy. The list goes on and on. It takes a team. No different than in sports. It takes a team of brothers and sisters to win a championship. Just like in business, it takes a team to be in that boardroom negotiating deals and winning contracts. Everything is based on a team. From ministry to business to sports and even to the street lifestyle. It takes a team and an organization. I'm not saying it has to be big or small. That's not the point. But the point is there has to be that team unit. And that's what Father Abraham had on his journey. And that's one thing that got him through his times of famine. Another jewel to get from this. Yeah, family, this is going to be one of those long discussions. So, relax. Get a nice seat, get comfortable, come back and listen to it in stages if you need to, but this is going to be one of those long ones because I really want this to get ingrained in our heart and mind. Another jewel to get from this story of Father Abraham is that on his journeys, he built altars to the Most High. He built altars. The jewel that we can get from this is the importance of prayer. In times of famine, the importance of prayer. Think about Elijah when he was in the time of famine for that 3.5 years that it wasn't raining in Israel. He constantly was in prayer and communion to the Most High. Think about the Maccabees whenever they went into the wilderness, fleeing from the oppression of the Greeks to rally themselves to fight against the Greeks and the oppressors. One of their main weapons was prayer. Even when they was in the wilderness, they was building altars to the Most High to pray and make sacrifice and fast. So that's something we can never forget in times of famine. We must always pray without ceasing. Always pray without ceasing. Prayer is one of the most powerful aspects to get us through times of famine. It seems so simple and so common sense, but we often have to be reminded of these things. And this is another thing that got Father Abram through his times of famine, is that he prayed constantly. And everywhere he went, he built altars to the Most High, to remember the name of the Most High. Building those altars to the Most High is very important for us. building an altar to him in our minds, meaning we always think on him and think on his laws and commandments, as it says in Joshua chapter 1 verse 7 and 8, to constantly meditate on the laws and commands of the Most High, and to do these things, then you shall prosper and have good success. Be strong and courageous. In other words, take that righteous risk. You see how all these things connect. So prayer, we must never forget prayer in times of famine. The next thing that we can learn about here is that whenever Father Abram went to Egypt, Sarah was used as a strategy for them to maneuver through a land of a people that was hostile against them. They was maneuvering through Egypt. And Father Abraham came up with that plan to put Sarah in Pharaoh's face. And we know what ended up happening after that, that the Most High began to plague Pharaoh's house because of Sarah. Now, whenever we read scripture and we see the stories of our ancestors and how they got success in many situations, that don't mean we have to do exactly what they did. What I mean by that is, in these times we're in, nobody is telling us to do what Abram did or put our wife out there to give her over to another man. The scriptures is not telling us to do that. But here's some wisdom we can get from this. The wisdom we can get from this is that the Hebrew woman always is able to disarm the adversary. What do I mean by that? The enemy is always disarmed, or he is never threatened by the Hebrew woman or by the black woman. This is why you see so much, even in this society now, they cater a lot to black women. This society does. I'm not saying our sisters don't have their fair share of their struggle. They absolutely do. But what I'm saying is the fear and the threat of an alpha Hebrew male is stronger in the eyes of the enemy, in the eyes of an oppressor, than the Hebrew woman. Take it back to Egypt. They wanted to destroy all the Hebrew males and leave the women alive. And the enemy today thinks the exact same way. If he can get rid of the men and still leave our women around for him to deal with sexually, for him to use as his secretaries, his servants, his slaves, and to utilize their labor and utilize their wombs, he would want to do that. So what I'm saying is, there's times where our sisters can be in place to act against the adversary. Also think about Egypt, where the midwives, the Hebrew midwives, Pharaoh told them to kill all the Hebrew boys. But the Hebrew midwives, they refused to obey Pharaoh's policy and his rules. That's the same spirit that you sisters need today. Some of you sisters that are in these positions where you know they have you there because they're not threatened by you. And you have a certain amount of access. You have a certain amount of power that they would be afraid to hand over to a Hebrew man. You can utilize that position for your people, just like the Hebrew midwives did, just like Queen Esther did. Let that sink in for a moment. There's been times in business negotiations where my wife would go in on my behalf. And don't you know, I notice a great difference when I do business negotiations, especially with other Gentiles. They're threatened. It's almost like they immediately go on the defensive when they see a Hebrew man go in there. But times that I sent my wife in there to negotiate, either to negotiate the deal, negotiate the funding, whatever the case may be, they were disarmed with her in there. And sometimes that would make deals go through because she was out there in the forefront and I was in the back watching the whole thing play out. And even the wicked understand this because there are many men in this society, even though it's on the wicked side, they understand this principle because there are many men who are getting wealthy through using the bodies of women. Basically pimping women. That's the unrighteous version of it. I'm talking about the righteous version of it where sisters understand your power and how there's some situations where you have more access to the enemy, so you can utilize that position not to do anything wicked, not to have these Gentile sugar daddies and things like that. I'm not talking about letting these Gentiles touch all on you and flirting all up with them and all that. No. What I'm talking about is understanding psychologically they don't fear you as much as they fear the Hebrew man. So if you're in a position where you're able to make moves that will better your household or help your people because you are in that position, do so. And understand that you are powerful in many instances because the enemy does not view you as a threat in many cases. So there's times, sisters, where the Most High will use you to go to war on behalf of your people, just like he did with Sister Judith. And we'll get to that story later. And this is what took place with Sarah, where she did not go in there and sin with Pharaoh, but she was utilized for Abraham to survive him and his family in this time of famine. Because after the Most High started hitting Pharaoh and them with plagues because of Sarah, whenever you read here in chapter 13, look what happens next. It says, and Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. Now, that's a quick turnaround from just earlier where it said it was a time of great famine. So Abraham went from being in famine to flourishing. From famine to flourishing. Flourishing in a time of famine. And all these jewels that I gave from these 2 short chapters here will also give us understanding on how to flourish in times of famine, just like Father Abraham did. Let these things sink deep into your soul. Really understand what I'm saying here. Because the times that are coming upon us, we must utilize all these strategies that we see our ancestors used so that they were able to flourish in times of famine. Now, let's go to Genesis chapter 26. Let's read about Isaac. Because we see that with Isaac, a similar situation repeated itself. It's almost as if Isaac learned all his tactics and maneuvers from his father Abraham. So let's read about it. Genesis chapter 26. It says, and there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Most High appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws, and Isaac dwelt in Gerar. And the men of that place asked him of his wife, and he said, she is my sister, for he feared to say, she is my wife. Lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah his wife. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, of a surety she is thy wife. And how saidest thou, she is my sister? And Isaac said unto him, Because I said, lest I die for her. And Abimelech said, What is this thou hast done to us? One of the people might lightly have lain with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guilt upon us. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, He that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Verse 12. Then Isaac sowed in that land and received in the same year 100-fold, and the Most High blessed him. Let that sink in for a moment while I drink this water. Just like in the time of Abraham, there was a famine. We're also seeing this here in the time of Isaac. There was another famine, meaning a lack of resources, a lack of options. Isaac's back was against the wall. They were hungering, they were thirsting. Everybody else around them in that time was on starvation mode. But it says here that Isaac sowed in that land where there was a famine, and he still reaped 100-fold. In other words, he was flourishing even in a time of famine. Even in a time of famine, he was flourishing. Let's keep reading here, verse 13. And the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. For he had possession of flocks and possession of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with earth. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, for thou art much mightier than we. And Isaac departed thence and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac digged again the wells of water which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. And he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. And Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water. And the herdmen of Gerar did strive with Isaac's herdmen, saying, The water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they strove with him. And they digged another well and strove for that also. And he called the name of it Sitnah. And he removed from thence and digged another well, and for that they strove not, and he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, For now the Most High has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. And he went up from thence to Beersheba, and the Most High appeared unto him the same night, and said, I am the Elohim of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Most High, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzath, one of his friends, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said unto them, Wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? And they said, We saw certainly that the Most High was with thee, and we said, Let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee. And let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee, and as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace. Thou art now the blessed of the Most High. And he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink. And they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another. And Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. And it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him concerning the well which they had digged, and said unto them, We have found water. And he called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba unto this day. There's a lot of jewels in these verses as well, family. One of the jewels that we can get is that Isaac did exactly the same things that his father Abraham did. He did with his wife the same way that Father Abraham did with his. He built an altar to pray to the Most High, the same way Abraham did. And he remembered the promises of the Most High, just like his father Abraham did. So a jewel that we can get from this to use in the times that we live in, so that we can flourish in times of famine, is that we must look back on what our ancestors did who survived their times of famine. It's nothing new under the sun. So the same things our ancestors did to survive times of famine, we must do it as well so that we can stand and endure and thrive even through times of famine. Whenever there was times of famine, just remember what your ancestors did. Remember how they trusted the Most High and lived off the land. How they went back to simple lifestyles of farming and simple lifestyles of being a nomad. These are the things that got them through. These are the things that will also get us through in these times that's coming. We must never forget how our ancestors made it through and do the same things that they did to get through. In times of oppression, they did not bow to the oppressor. The enemy was coming out with all types of mandates and policies telling them if you don't do this, then you won't be able to eat. You won't be able to enter into our establishment. If you don't do this, you won't be able to work here. All these mandates that they gave our people still stood on the Most High, still stood on principles. And they was willing to even die for those principles. That's the same thing we got to do in these times of famine that will be coming upon the earth. Because just like our ancestor Abraham and Isaac that we're reading about, we are not going to be those who fall away and die during those times, be it the Most High's will, of course. We are going to be those who flourish even in the times of famine. Hallelujah. While Babylon falls, we want to be those who stand. While Babylon dies, we want to be those who thrive. So much so that our enemies would envy us, just like they did with Isaac here. It said that the Philistines envied Isaac because he was thriving and flourishing even while they was going through famine. I think about last year in 2020, whenever the pandemic was hitting hard, the Most High spoke to myself and my family. Not in some spooky, mysterious way, but just an insight, just a discernment on new businesses to start, new opportunities to invest in. And it was during those times, all praise to the Most High, that He kept me and my family and the brothers and sisters attached to us, to where many things that was happening out there due to the pandemic, we was able to thrive and flourish even in the midst of all that chaos. And I want the same thing for you, that in these times where they're trying to make people fearful, where they're trying to come out with all these policies, trying to force you, if you don't get this or if you don't get that, if you don't get this type of medical procedure, and you know what I'm talking about, then you won't be able to work here. You won't be able to eat here. All these threats they're making. We want you to be able to flourish even in famine so that you ain't worried about them giving you some resources, because the Most High will sustain you through the work of your hands and through the ingenuity of your mind. The Most High will give you ideas. The Most High will speak to you, just like He did to Isaac and his servants. It says here that they dug many wells until they found water. That's the same thing that you and I need to do in order to flourish in times of famine. I'm not talking about going out and digging an actual well unless the Father leads you to do that, because ain't nothing wrong with trying to find your own source of water in these times. But when I say dig many wells, like Isaac and his servants, they dug all those wells until they found water. To dig many wells means to find multiple sources of income. Try your hand in many things. Keep trying things until you find something that works, something that is able to sustain you and bring you a nice income stream to where you will not be touched by the famines going on around you. Dig many wells can also mean for us to get back into gardening again. for us to get back into ways of producing our own food, or if we don't do that, even stocking up on food while the grid is still up. Getting some of those military ration foods, portions. Getting some of those dried foods that last for 25, 30 years and putting them up somewhere in your garage, somewhere in your house. Stocking up on food and water and being ready for times of famine. Because we're going to read about the story of Joseph here shortly, because that's exactly what he did. He made sure that his people, his household, his nation was prepared for the famine by stocking up on supplies. So right now, that's something we could be doing with the extra resources we have, stocking up, getting ready for those times of famine, so that when it hits, when food shortages hit, you got food stocked up. Whenever water shortages hit, you got water stocked up. And even beyond that, just being able to hear from the Most High on where you need to go. Like here with Isaac and his servants, the Most High was speaking to them and telling them where to dig those wells. That's the same thing the Father will do for us in times of famine. How we flourish is to hear and obey his voice. Hearing the Most High's voice and obeying him is not just in obedience to the laws and commands, but the Most High will speak to us on things to do in life. He'll give you ideas. He'll tell you what to invest in and what not to invest in order that you may flourish. You got to know how to tap into his voice through prayer, through fasting, through getting in that peace and quiet place so you can hear clearly from him by being in his word. Sometimes just reading his word back to back, chapter for chapter, verse for verse. The Spirit of truth will begin to speak to you and give you ideas just by you reading the word. And these are the things that Isaac did so that he could flourish in a time of famine. So much so that his enemies envied him. And this is what will take place with us as well in the times to come. You and your household, the children of Israel, the righteous remnant, we will flourish even while the rest of the world is going through famine. And they will envy the fact that we are thriving and dominating and rising ever to the top while they are continually falling, being destroyed, and going unto perdition. We shall rise higher and higher, enduring through all the persecution, enduring through all the tribulation. We shall flourish even in famine. Hallelujah. Let those words sink deep into your heart, family. Now, I want to go to the next story. Let's go to Genesis chapter 41 about Joseph. I spoke on this earlier. And before we go to Joseph, I want to remind us of one more thing from the story of Isaac. It speaks about how Isaac and his servants was digging wells until they found water in the time of famine. And what's interesting about that is when our people, the children of Israel, was traveling through the wilderness in our exodus out of Egypt, whenever we were in need of water, for those days we were going without water, one thing that our people would do was praise the Most High, and we would say, "Spring up, O well." Whenever we lacked water, we would praise the Most High, and we would tell the wells of water to spring up. In other words, we had to use faith. There were times when our people was going through the wilderness that they did not see no water. Sometimes they went days without water. So they would praise the Most High and speak in faith or speak it into existence for wells of water to spring up. This is something else we must do in times of famine, family. We can't speak defeat, disappointment, lack, all those things whenever we're in a time of famine. We need to speak that the Most High is going to cause us to flourish. We need to speak that the wells will not dry up, but they will spring up and rise up. We have to speak over our marriages. We have to speak over our talents, gifts, and abilities. We have to speak over our ministries. Everything that the Father has given us stewardship over, we need to speak life and abundance into those things. Spring up, O well. We are not those who fail. We are those who have victory, success, and destiny. So those are the things that we need to be speaking. Victory, success, and destiny. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 41. Many of you know this story very well about Joseph and the famine in Egypt and how he got through and how he got his people through and his household through and our people. Genesis 41. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up on one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler